3, 2, 1.
Well, yeah, we can't thank you enough. I know it's kind of...
Yeah, sorry so last minute, by the way. I looked at when I saw your email again yesterday. I went, fuck, if I don't do this now, I'm going to hit the road and I'm not going to do it for a year. So I just wanted to see, can you guys roll quickly? Because I wanted to make sure I did this.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. We really appreciate it because we'd love to have you on, of course.
Yeah, and we're off today, so I mean, let's do it. If I have a half hour notice to get...
Are you from Alberta?
No. We're from the East Coast, Newfoundland, of course.
Yeah, I thought I heard a Newfoundland in there, but I don't know.
Yeah, oh yeah. Both of us, we both grew up together. Like, we've known each other since we were little kids. So
nice.
Yeah.
In Newfoundland?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Same city. Bishop's Falls, so it's like dead center Newfoundland.
Oh, yeah. Very cool.
Very
cool.
much like Grand Prairie, actually. Oddly enough, which is kind of funny. Like, people think Newfoundland, ocean people or whatever, but like, we didn't. No, we were a bunch of lumberjacks.
Yeah, and then moved halfway across the country and found our way living in the same town again, and we've always had the idea of possibly starting a podcast. We've always liked the media and being creative and different things like that. So it was like almost like, hey, let's just do this now.
Yeah.
And it's been a year and a half or so and 70 some odd episodes, and
great.
Early on, like we would talk about MuchMusic and how, like, kind of started how, like, us talking about our childhood, what raised us, what we grew up on, things like that. And we would just throw it out there. Wouldn't it be great, to talk to some of these people? And so, I'm totally honored to have you here. You've been a huge inspiration, a huge figurehead in our lives, and
for sure.
to follow your career. So it's been, this is a full circle moment for sure for us.
Yeah, man. It's awesome.
Happy to do it.
Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Really appreciate it, man.
So yeah, like I guess I can start. I mean, like, how are you? How's everything with the fires been affecting you? You're good? Everything's good?
Yeah, I'm good, man. I'm good. We didn't get evacuated here. My neighborhood, we got put on the be prepared to be evacuated list. But the two places I lived before, those whole neighborhoods burned down in Topanga and Malibu. So definitely a lot of my friends affected here. A lot of people affected by what's going on. But we got very lucky. It's crazy, right? It's the winds.
Yeah,
that's the thing you got to worry about the most, right? Are the winds. And so if something happens with that, your life can change in 2 minutes. Right, no fires, and all of a sudden a fire showed up about 8 minutes from where I am today, and then you catch a bad gust, and then your neighborhood goes up. It's so volatile.
Yeah, crazy.
You just don't know. So it's an interesting experience living here. But I've been here for a long time. I've been splitting my time between Toronto and LA for 20 years. So LA will always throw something at you. This is where the wild things are. This is a crazy place to be.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely crazy. Yeah, seeing the visuals, like, I mean, obviously we're not there, but we're seeing the visuals just strictly from photographs and news footage and stuff. Like, it looks like a war zone, man. Like, it's crazy, and like and you see the war zone, but you still see it burn in the background too, which is like, holy shit! Yeah. Like, what? The hell?
There are neighborhoods that are huge regions that are gone.
Yeah, it's crazy. Gone. Like, craziness.
Gone. Yeah, and it happened in one night. Right. Yeah. So it's a real test of your appreciation of the impermanence of life.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
To live in places like this, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we're no stranger to forest fires as well. Yeah. Most of our summers, we usually deal with that, and
smoked out the whole summer kind of thing.
Yeah, like I said, one change in direction of the wind, and you get gusts up to 70, 80, or in your case, 100 kilometers an hour that were down there. I mean, it could and did take out a whole, section of the city and whole neighborhoods in one kind of whole swoop there. So
yeah,
it does kind of make you put things in perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's
for
scary.
sure.
That stuff's scary.
Absolutely. But yeah, we're safe. I'm safe. Thanks, my friends. And a lot of my friends are okay. A bunch have split the city. A bunch have been evacuated. Some have lost their homes. But everybody kind of, like where you're at. There's a really strong community bond that comes together when things go really hairy.
Yeah, for sure. And that's one thing I've noticed online is like, seems like everybody's getting behind the LA fires. And I think everybody has a connection as well. I mean, no matter what industry you're in, like if you've put a camera or a microphone in front of yourself, I think you have a connection to a certain degree if you're in those industries. Like, I mean, we're in the skateboarding and those types of things. Like, guys are putting out, limited skateboard sign things, auctioning, trick equipment kind of thing, stuff that they're wearing during tricks or whatever. Musicians going crazy. Like it's awesome to see, as much as a horrendous thing happening. It's cool to see everybody step up, right? That's cool.
It's probably the most hated city. Like, I'm from Toronto, so I'm used to it, right? Toronto, we get all kinds of hate from people across Canada, and it's ridiculous because it's like, seriously, guys, we don't hate you. We don't give a fuck, right? We're in fact, we're the opposite. But people love to hate, especially in the modern social media era. People love to hate the city, Toronto, and they hate LA. But what they don't realize is how many people who are here love this place. Like, because it isn't what people think it is. It isn't the Hollywood that when people talk about Hollywood and the elites, those are usually said by fucking morons. They don't actually know what this city is, right? It's not that at all. There are elements of that, but they're the same elements in Calgary and Toronto and in Chicago and lots more in DC. Vancouver, pick a city, you always have malakas, right? But this ain't the city that people think it is. And so the ones who are here who love it. And it's a big part of the identity, because this is a great place to get everything you need in the world, good and bad, right? It's a good and bad city in that respect. So people came together for it because the devastation, it's the largest fires in the history of the city. That's pretty insane.
Yeah, I think if there's one positive to disasters and things like that, it does bring everyone together, right? And like I said, I've been hearing things about maybe even like a fire kind of, like a music festival. Or have you heard anything kind of along those lines yet?
I've heard a few things coming together, but nothing yet. It's because it's still happening.
Right? Yeah, it's not.
Yeah. It's things. I just got reached out to yesterday from somebody in Montreal who wants to do it, and somebody brought up something in Toronto. I'm hesitant to jump on things that happen right away. I think it's really important to let's just take a breath and see what's going on here.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is only January, so that we are nowhere near out of the woods when it comes to this kind of stuff. And as you know, and where you're at, same thing, right? So I've heard rumblings, but nothing official yet that I've seen. But there will be tons of stuff because people they've lost everything.
Yeah.
Like thousands of people have lost everything.
And that's one thing I can't really comprehend. I mean,
not to that degree,
whole life's work, just gone in an instant. And but I just kind of wanted to maybe thought you had some inside info or something. I seen Dave Grohl kind of do a little wink and nod that maybe he's partly involved as well. So,
well, I mean they've been kind of underground for a minute, so that would be the place for them to play, I think.
Yeah. People can kind of look past the personal bullshit and just, people need to be entertained and people need to get their mind,
For sure, yeah. Big rock and roll show.
And they need money raised.
Yeah. I mean, I can't believe the totals I've heard already, like hundreds of billions of dollars. So they're going to need it. I mean,
it's just, it's crazy. Like looking at the visuals, it's insane. It looks like, somebody just tossed a bomb in there and walked away. Like, it's crazy. Like, it astounds me. And like I say, and I think some of it is that the fires had got so close to us a couple times recently, like, kind of on our back door, like you relate to it a little bit more when it's kind of close and it's a little sticky. Yeah, man, I definitely feel for those people. And the whole, it's all rich people thing is nonsense. Like people live everywhere, like chill out. So like it's really, I'm super unfortunate and it's crazy that's still going on. You know what I mean? Like the whole thing is crazy. Like it's,
It really is. And there's the kind of the joke that I say to my friends about LA is that if it isn't the fires that'll get you, it's the earthquakes. And if it ain't the earthquakes, it's the mudslides. And if it isn't the mudslides, it's the crime. And if it isn't the crime, it's the cops. Like there's always something here that you have to keep your head on a swivel about but we get these beautiful canyons. We have the ocean. And as you know, you've heard the line, you can surf and ski or snowboard in the same day. You've got the great skateboard culture, if that's your thing. If you are, a motorcycle guy like me, I have an old El Camino as well. There's a hive of Caminos in Venice. So all the bands that I love, not counting the punk from New York or LA, is you think about Suicidal Tendencies and bands like that I started listening to as a kid that from over here. And it's just, and Metallica just up there, up the highway if it was 6 hours. So, and Slayer. So now you have just so much of the culture of that really hardcore, that hardcore like 80s is here. And a lot of it was created here and developed here. So you get all the good things, most of the good things, but you don't get many. You can hear right now a police chopper flying over. You get a lot of that too.
I thought that was here actually. I'm like, wow.
So that's a cop flying over my house right now.
Yeah. We was both kind of. I did the same thing. Kind of like, is that here? Is that there?
So when you were a kid, like you said, and you were listening to these bands, did you have LA in mind? Like, I want to be there someday.
When I was maybe. Yeah, I'm one of those kids who grew up really, 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 really poor, like below the poverty line kind of poor. And so you have and obviously it was an era where we didn't have computers in my home. I didn't get a VCR, didn't have video games. So when I was a kid, I read a lot and I listened to a lot of music. And so my imagination, I definitely seeded my imagination from a very, very young age. And the really lucky thing about my home, I was raised by a single mom who is amazing and pretty hardcore, is my mom's very religious, and I'm obviously not. So I found a way to build my own identity very young. So I wasn't following a path in my home very young. I rebelled against everything to a fault. Some of the shit now I sit back and think, that she was right, but as a kid, I was just built around rebellion, and I remained that way. And so a lot of the music, a lot of the stuff that felt like that free antagonist culture was either that Lower East Side, East Village, punk and hip hop from New York. Obviously Brooklyn, and the Bronx, I get all that. But a lot of it for me was connected to East Village in New York, and a lot of it was connected to LA. So when I was young, I was very much attracted to both those cities. And also I got a job as a teenager at a movie theater. So I was an usher for 7 years. And so movies and the movie culture is ingrained in me. So I know as much about movies as I know about music. And I love where the wild things are. I love where the crazy shit happens. I love where artists go make counterculture stuff. And for my age group, a lot of it was here. This is where Neil Young moved, right? So when I was a kid, I heard Neil Young moved here. I was like, well, I guess I'm going to get in the car and drive to LA, which is what I did when I was 18. I got in a car, I drove to New York, and I drove to LA. And so I'll never leave Canada. I'll never leave Toronto. I'm a Canadian boy full on. And I think part of the reason I love LA so much is because I'm Canadian. And I think this is built for people who aren't from here, right? Mm. And most friends here are Canadians, and most of us find each other here. So to me, this is just another Canadian city, just living in an alternate reality level of a video game. But yeah, no. And so I always knew I was going to be, London, I think, is next for me. I've lived in LA. I've lived in New York. I've lived in Toronto. I've lived in Kelowna. I've lived, places around the country. As a kid, I thought maybe one day I'm going to live in Montreal because I'm a Habs fan. And then I thought maybe one day I'm going to live in London. So London, I think, is next for me as an experience. I just want to squeeze the most out of life, man. This is it.
That's right.
The older I get, the more I realize that we're conditioned to play it safe, and I just won't do that. I want the full experience. And so to me, the full experience, for me, it's not true for everybody, but for me, the full experience is going out and living in different places and meeting different people and experiencing different cultures and learning, and then always have your home base in Toronto or Canada, wherever you're from. But the world is here. I don't want to go to my grave having just done one thing, Yeah. So I always knew LA was going to be a part of it, and New York was going to be a part of it. And I always knew Toronto would be home. Those are the things that are always a fact to me in my heart.
Yeah. I mean, you've always blazed your own trail, right? And that totally fits your narrative of doing your own thing and being your own individual. Like you said, as an early age, you did your own thing. You were against the grain type of guy.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think also I got lucky in that my brain chemistry aligned with the time we were in. So if you think about, if you're feeling like, when you come from a single parent home and you grow up poor and you're in rougher neighborhoods, you grow, especially boys, we grow up with an anger in us, right? And there's a kind of anger that you have to figure out how to manage, or becomes an adult male rage, which I think is, there's no evidence in history that that's a good thing for people, for themselves. It's bad for you, right? And so I'm a big believer. That's why I know people hate my politics, because I'm way more left wing than most of them. But what they can never, ever, ever criticize me for is not understanding what this is really about, which is making sure that we're okay, especially for dudes as we get older and we get attacked by everything. So when I was young and I had that kind of anger, and I'm an introvert, but I'm one step further. I'm very antisocial. I am to this day very antisocial. It's not part of my wiring to be a very outgoing guy. I had to learn that as a second language. And so my brain chemistry had all that stuff. But at the time, if you think about it, from the age of 5 to 15, really formative years in my life, all of a sudden I'm watching Taxi Driver, the movie. I'm reading Stephen King because they're coming out. It's the Sex Pistols, the Clash, Slayer, Venom, Metallica, the Beastie Boys. You have the post-punk stuff that was coming out. You have Minor Threat and Fugazi, right? You have the Misfits. So, and then you have David Lynch movies, rest in peace. And you have, like, I was seeing Eraserhead as a teenager in a movie theater. I was never the kind of kid I wasn't reading comics trying to get into, I wasn't into, I like Spider-Man, but I'm way more connected to I watched Night of the Living Dead my mother couldn't afford a babysitter, so she would drop me off at a public library, right? Wow. And the library would keep an eye on me. And I remember following some adults behind this curtain, and they were screening Night of the Living Dead when I was like 7. And so my rebellious heart suddenly aligned with all of this amazing music and amazing movies and filmmakers, that Jim Jarmusch films, trying to be just on the outside. Hearing Kate Bush and then hearing Public Enemy. And by the way, this is all before we get Guns N' Roses and then Nirvana and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains, which were massive for me. And of course, we got Neil Young always floating in the background with Bob Dylan as the gods. So, it was just a perfect time to be a rebellious kid who didn't know what to do, who didn't know how to express. I have no education. I went to a community college for radio broadcasting. I didn't even apply to a university because I would never be able to afford that. So I'm just not from that. My family didn't have careers. We had jobs. My family, I don't come from a career family. I don't come from a university family. We have jobs. And super blue collar and lower on that social strata. Then you realize, listening to punk, that like metal made me realize that I was going to be okay, and punk made me want to make sure that you were going to be okay. So those two genres really, and then then the Suicidal Tendencies stuff happened, the band, and they were the perfect bridge between the two. And the Misfits and Suicidal were perfect bands for kids who love punk and metal and Zeppelin. And you just kind of went, okay, well, shit, I guess this is who I am now. And I think it completely saved me. No word of a lie. Now, look, I have an amazing mother who was a great loving heart, and my Uncle Paul, who's the one who introduced me to Dylan and Neil Young and Tom Waits. So obviously he brought the art to me, but the alchemy of all that was crucial. It's why I've built a living around music, because I know how important it is to somebody who doesn't know where they belong. I know it matters, man. It's more than just a song. It's more than just a song. It's a relationship.
Yeah. And and it's so awesome too, to be such an introvert and to put yourself outside of that box and to put yourself out there. How did you feel like when you got to meet some of these idols you had as a kid?
Pretty cool, man.
Yeah.
Like I never take it for granted, and I got to go for a walk with Joe Strummer. And dude, listening to Joe Strummer with that voice give you his worldview. That's like, for a guy like me, that's a really, really big deal. I got to hang out with Stephen King and talk to him. I got to talk to Gore Vidal, who wrote these really powerful works. And I got to hang out with Maya Angelou, who I remember buying one of her books at a garage sale when I was a kid, and reading that. I grew up in a neighborhood that was very ethnically diverse. Everybody was immigrants, and most people in my school, myself included, we're the first people in our family that were born in Canada. So it's a version of Canada that rarely gets the right kind of attention, I think, or the right look. And so the garage sales in our neighborhood were epic. I was buying Eldridge Cleaver books and John Kenneth Galbraith books. So I was learning about the economy at 12 and reading, books about, incarcerated Black Panthers when I was 12 and 13 and 14 years old. So all of that. So I got to meet a lot of them, and and I loved it because I never fake it. So I was really connected to what they did. But meeting Joe Strummer, and I got to tell you, hanging out with Johnny Rotten from the Pistols is the best, because Johnny is the same. Johnny never, at least doesn't present at all like he's softened. So he's that guy. And of all the people I've met who are the closest to that guy, it's Johnny Rotten. And even though I don't agree with a lot of the stuff Johnny Rotten stands for now, I have a lot of respect for the fact that he is him. Same with Jello Biafra from the Dead Kennedys. I was getting shit tear gassed out of me at a protest in Quebec City, and I couldn't see anything, right? I stumbled into an alley. The cops were shooting at us with tear gas, and all of a sudden some guy goes, George, grabs me and starts pouring water in my eyes, and I open my eyes and it's Jello from the Dead Kennedys.
Wow.
I mean, come on, right?
That's crazy.
I recognize how privileged I am
That's
to be able to have that. And Al Jorgensen from Ministry, meeting Al from Ministry is a really big deal for me. And yeah, so I've been so lucky, man. And Chuck D from Public Enemy. One day Chuck D and Tom Morello came to my home for an interview, and I'm sitting there with Public Enemy and Rage Against the Machine.
Wow.
It's crazy.
What is going on in my life? How lucky am I? I don't take anything of that for granted,
Do you find that kind of stuff? And I don't know if these were intimidating, but intimidating, or like when you're about to jump into those tables, is it like, oh shit, or is it like, yeah, like I can't wait to do this?
No, never intimidated. And I'll tell you, it's because I believe so much in the idea that what we're actually here to do, and it sounds like bullshit because a lot of people in my position say this, but they don't mean it, but it's true, is that I'm not the star, they're not the star. What really matters is the person who's having a terrible day today, who chose to watch this. Are we showing up for them? Guys who hate us or like us, doesn't matter. Guys who are battling with addiction, women who are battling with mental health issues, people who are being stepped on by corporations and shitbird companies that make us think that way. We're all mad at politicians, and I get why we are mad at politicians, but it's really the companies that are the big problem, and the politicians are part of it, but there's lots of good politicians too. And so those people who don't know, how the fuck am I going to make my mortgage payment or my rent payment today, or is my car going to get repoed, or am I sick? And especially our audience who don't live in Canada, who don't have health care, am I sick? That's the kind of stuff that really matters. And I know that a conversation about music doesn't change the world. I know that it doesn't cure all, but it can help somebody feel just a little bit less alone and feel like, you know what? I know how much lyrics mattered to me as a kid. Maybe something that this guy could say can impact this person. And so my expectation from every interview is that's what we're here to do. I'm not here I'm not, even if I am a heavy fan, we're here to get into it, man. Now, I also realized over time that not every interview has to have 900 home runs in it. You really got to set up a couple. And a lot of it's just shooting the shit and hanging out and being comfortable and setting the scene so that you can go in for the big moment. I had to learn that over time because when I first started, I was just like, let's go. I was a little too intense. I had to learn how to mellow it out a little bit. But no, man, never. Maybe the first time I met Eugene Levy, I was a little intimidated because SCTV is the masterpiece of masterpieces. And I was a kid. Eugene Levy was always my favorite. So I sat on a park bench with Eugene Levy to do an interview, and I looked over at him, and I remember thinking, "Yo, I don't know what the hell to do here." And I remain an eternal fan. I'm an eternal fan of Eugene Levy.
Yeah, he's such a legend too. Like and it's childhood legend kind of thing. That's a whole different thing. Yeah, I can see that for sure. That's cool.
He's had such a great career too. Even Schitt's Creek is just amazing.
Yeah, super good show. Super good show.
Super fun. And he is. I don't know how old you guys are, but in my age group, like in high school, we would go pre The Simpsons, right? We would go to school and we would just do all the FCTV lines to each other. And then as The Simpsons became the thing, right? But SCTV, that was the show that we identified and connected with the most.
Yeah, I love that show, girl. Because this is our 40th spin around the sun this year now. So,
happy birthday, guys.
Yeah, thanks too. Yeah.
85. We're 85 babies, hence the name.
I figured that's why it's called. I don't know if you want to talk about all the records that came out in '85. That's some of the best records of all time. They came out in '85, but
I always have a bullshit factoid. I'm like, Tears for Fears, Everybody Wants to Rule the World came out. It was number 1 on my birthday. So
that's a good factoid. That's a good number 1 album on your birthday. If you're gonna have one,
dude. I think Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms came out in 1985, didn't it?
It did,
that's a huge year.
Yeah,
huge.
85's got a pretty big year, actually.
That band that really hit me was Jesus and Mary Chain.
Ooh.
They have a record, Psycho Candy, which is 85. 85 is a great year. We got lucky, man. Every generation has their thing, and this generation of youngsters have a lot of things that were better than we had, but they will never have the run of music that we had.
No, not even a bit. Like, and I think why, like going back to what you're saying, when your influences and stuff, I think that translated a lot. Like, I mean, my first time laying eyes on you was Loud, of course, right? Yeah. So, like your influences. Now that I know other things and I'm older and whatever, I can definitely see how that show was your show kind of thing. And like, it's to me, everything you do kind of has the Strombo thing. Like it's always like that. Like, so like now that I know, especially now that I know, like you grew up, in a multifaceted community with a bunch of different influences, that stuff shows, right? So now you've taken that, you've shown us something. Now we're onto something, because I think it's a perfect amalgamation. I think you were the perfect person to bring us, like when nu metal exploded in that kind of genre, because what you listened to was the precursor to that, right? Like, I
listened to both sides. I listened to the rap and the rock.
Yeah, you had and then you got Public Enemy and these style of bands kind of poking through, kind of blurring the line of rap, rock, rap and rock or whatever. And I think that was perfect for you guys, bringing that to us of our age group kind of thing, right?
I got offered the job at MuchMusic. They offered me to host the new music. I didn't watch a lot of MuchMusic because I didn't have cable as a kid. Mm-hmm. So I would see the free weekends, but that was about it. And to me, I always just thought MuchMusic was just because I listened to stuff that was pretty heavy, and I didn't really get to see a lot of that. At least that's what I thought. We had a video show called Toronto Rocks, and every Wednesday night was metal night, and that was when I would watch it. And it was on free TV. When they offered me the new music at MuchMusic, I said to them, my only condition is that you let me host Loud, because they didn't have a host for Loud, and they said, okay. and then when I started doing Loud, I said, now give me the punk show. I created a punk show. They didn't have a show, so I said, I'm going to create a thing called a punk show. They said, no problem. And so that and in my entire career, no matter what I've done, the thing that makes me the happiest is if somebody says to me, Loud or the punk show, because those two things to me, sharing those videos. And by the way, dude, MuchMusic didn't ever see the show before it went to air. I would just make it. I would edit it. I would edit it, like sometimes at my home, and then give it to an editor to clean it up. And I picked every video, and I would boom. I had a guy called Alex who worked with me on the punk show and Live for a little bit. He helped pick some of the videos, but it was just, I love metal. And so I was able to play lots of different kinds of bands, and Much never, ever saw it. I don't even think they ever watched the show, to be honest with you.
Wow.
They never watched. I was playing some insane shit on that show.
That's crazy. That's awesome. But that was a huge influence on us growing up. I mean, it came out like in Newfoundland. It came out 12. 12:30 or 1:30.
Yeah,
Late
because
at
it was
night.
11 o'clock in the East. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a late night, but we used to like I stayed up to watch those shows as a kid, recording it, and like of course when I knew like things were going to debut or I figured something cool was happening, you'd be with your finger on the record button and stuff, right? So it's
Yeah.
But it was that era too where the Knot came out. So Slipknot and Slipknot and Ozfest, those two things were really powerful in those early 2000s.
for sure.
And it energized what we were doing. Like we were doing Lamb of God interviews really early, and it was just such a great time, man.
Yeah, so it's like that's kind of like our magic time, and I'm in a similar boat. Like I didn't have much all the time. Like it was only when we could afford it and stuff like that. So being able to catch stuff was, and then of course the record, it was like the highlight of the night kind of thing to be able to watch all that stuff, right? Because you lose it generally like over the winter or whatever, right? Because it was too expensive. You just get into summertime when people are home for a couple months because it wouldn't be so expensive. But yeah, until we were older, of course, we kind of got it once everything got straightened away. But yeah, man, that was a humongous influence to us, I think, and especially like the punk show. Growing up as like little skate punks kind of thing. I mean, we're in a small community, but we were little skate punks and trying to find something that was cool. And like we were talking, with Rick and stuff, like Toronto to us was LA. So like seeing all that stuff, you guys, giving us all that stuff, showing us all these new things, the views from the street, the live interviews. I mean, it had a huge impact on us. Like, what was your favorite time about, or favorite moments around that time kind of thing?
That time, so there was a really, right next to Much, there was a really cool, and still stays, it's called So Hip It Hurts. It was a skate shop, right? But also, I wasn't a skater. I ride BMXs, but not a skater. Except they would have all the new VHSs coming in, right? And those VHSs were always, so my friends would watch them because they wanted to see the skating, and I would watch them because I wanted to hear the new punk bands. So my favorite time, and I maintain that for scenes to be dynamite, you need a bunch of factors to play together. You need the people making the music. You need the athletes, which are the skaters. You need, and of course, snowboarding started to pick up, which I did snowboard. But then what you need is that other group of kids who are documenting it. So all this whole social media video world we live in, everybody, and they don't give it nearly the respect, they all owe a debt to that one kid with the camera holding it low, filming. Because remember, hip hop was very much was being photographed in a way that nothing else had been, and punk was being filmed. Because local bands playing backyards were being put on VHSs. So punk and hip hop in the early days had a lot in common. The way things were being filmed, the way songs were being shared, because they were both. Obviously, they're not the same, very different. I understand different societal pressures. I get all that for sure. But a lot of how we got it, I grew up in a neighborhood where there were a lot of Jamaican kids. And so they would have a cousin in New York or Philly, and we'd get a cassette, and that cassette would have all the new hip hop tunes, right? Like the skate videos would have all the new punk tunes. So my favorite part of that era was that we were all so excited for new shit. It was new shit. Not the same stuff you heard all the time, although that still had value, but new shit was really, really important. And your own identity, not wanting to be part of some homogenized, flattened group of cultural people. So, which is kind of what the internet, what social media really did, is everything is much more similar. You'd think that it would be more unique, but I travel around the world, and I'm so privileged to do that. But a lot of there's of course differences, but there are a lot of things that are very similar, and it didn't used to be that way because you're building your own scene, you're making it your own. And I know that still exists to a degree, but I think it's really important to fuel the kids who are doing that in your neighborhood, the ones who are making it different, because that's where the new shit comes. And so I still find lots of new stuff happening, but it doesn't get nearly the oxygen that it deserves. And so in that era, it was honestly be a kid walking down the street, handing me a cassette or a CD-ROM that he burned of his band. I'd listen to it, and I'd be like, I'm putting you on the punk show. That's how it happened. I'm putting you on the punk show on TV. They were like, what? I'm like, let's get a camera. Like it was, so the way that was my favorite thing about that era was just how it all worked together.
Yeah, it was, I think hip hop and punk share that DIY, right? Like, I think that's a lot of it. Like, especially at the ground level. Right? Yeah, especially in the early days at the ground level kind of thing. Even now, to a certain degree, I mean, it's not like always necessarily like a tape handoff or whatever. It's kind of like check out my SoundCloud or whatever. But it's the same context. But the upper, once you get past the starter level, it's not the same. But I miss that. I really miss the dub tape thing and all. Like I miss that the physical act of making the thing to give to your buddy or whatever. Like I miss that.
Yeah. It just reminded me of when Evil Empire came out, that record. I think it was in 97. But like my friend had a copy of it and him running up to me at recess. I think it was in grade 6 or 7. And it's like, you have to come over after school and listen to this. Like, that's how things got shared. Like, I miss that, like, passion about, like, having a CD and, like, we need to go listen to this.
Wait
Whereas,
for it
like,
to come out.
if someone just sends you a link to something, you can just scroll past it and not even really have that same kind of...
Yeah.
I still remember being 12 years old in high school, in junior high, and I had $5 and I bought a bootleg cassette and I went home and I listened to it and it was Metallica. And it was Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning. I paid $5 for those. I got Ride the Lightning, Kill 'Em.
Damn.
Actually, hold on.
Sick. Holy.
There's the Ride the Lightning. There's my Slayer haunting the chapel.
Yes.
These are like bonsai records, bootleg tapes.
Love it.
But I remember going home and had never heard anything like that. My friend Jimmy called me one day. We were all going out, and he said, "I got this new band you got to hear." He had this really, the kind of old metal cars where the floors are so rusted the fumes are coming in. He had one kind of cars, and he had a cassette, and he put on it was 5 guys packed in this small car, and he played the first Rage Against the Machine tape, and holy smokes, man! Yeah, absolutely epic.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rage Against the Machine was a big one. That was like my first. Same thing. I've told the story many times, but my good buddy who passed away a while back, but his brother was kind of like the source of all the music kind of thing. He was the one who had a couple bucks to buy the CDs kind of thing, and then he would just dub us tapes. But he handed me Rage Against the Machine, like the first one, and then Blood Sugar Sex Magic on the backside. He was like, "Here, take this home and listen to it." But of course, he drew, like a nice cover for me and like flip it over, and then the names were in there, and like it was beautiful. I wish I still had it. Like it was awesome. Like it was freaking awesome. But like that's the stuff I miss. Like that's the factor, right? Like so
I'm sorry
cool.
for your loss, man.
Yeah, man, that's a bad one. Yeah,
it's really special in your lives when you have people like that.
Yeah, he was a big influence on my stuff, but yeah, unfortunate things happen. I mean, it is what it is. But yeah, he was a huge influence on me as well in terms of music wise. Of course, he had his older brother, which helped too. So like he would have been around your age, I would assume.
What was his name?
So my buddy's name is Matt Noble. Yeah, so he
much love to.
Yeah, he
much
had
respect him.
he had Crohn's, and then that kind of led to some kind of addiction issues and stuff, and. That's how that kind of goes or whatever. But yeah, it's unfortunate. Super good dude, but yeah, I mean, here we are. I can pass along a little bit of him to everybody now, so it's all good.
Yeah, that's it.
But yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, those those days are long gone. Unfortunately,
so. Yeah.
I had 2 older brothers who shared a lot of stuff with me. I got my grunge influence from my older brother Luke, who he had all the Nirvana albums, and like that's how I got into that direction. And kind of, that's why I play guitar, and that's why I listen to these albums every single day. Right?
Too.
People don't get that anymore, and people certainly don't stay up till 10 p.m. to record top 10 at 10, on a cassette tape, like
that's right. Yeah.
Like,
totally.
You know what I mean? Like that's a special time.
In a way, we still do it. Like I'm always either through IG stories or my lives or on YouTube. I'm always trying to share. It isn't the same. You're right, but the spirit I think is still there for the people who care. I think the spirit's still there.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and the best we can do is pass along. Hey, have you heard this band before? Even though it might not be in a cassette form or whatever. Like I said, it could be a link or a Spotify, link or whatever. But
totally.
At least we try and do that, right?
I try to share things I like. I do try to do that. Like I don't really have a personal Instagram anymore. Like it's mostly the podcast and then my side thing or whatever. So I but through the podcast, that's kind of like, okay, if I kind of treat it that way, then I kind of think every time like, oh, this is cool. I should share it because it's if the audience could see it or whatever. I kind of look at it more like that way now.
And we've had episodes where we have this is what we're into, and we feature it on the podcast. This is what we're listening to. This is our favorites right now, and this is
the best.
So that's kind of what we want to put out there. We're just sharing what we love, and this is what we're kind of into. So
that's it.
That's what it's all about, man.
Yeah.
Hold that thought. I got somebody at my door. Can I come right back?
Absolutely.
Yeah, dude, do your thing. Going back to kind of like earlier, kind of like, the Much Loud era or whatever. What's your take on like Napster? Because I believe, like, for us, at least anyways, growing up in a small town with very little to no access to any type of media whatsoever.
No record store.
Yeah, no record stores. No, beyond a rental store or whatever, like a movie rental store. But nowhere to get that kind of stuff, or at least nothing that's kind of offbeat. Whatever comes out in top 10 or whatever, or top 40 radios out, but at Walmart type of thing or whatever. But like, it was a big influence on us. It made it easy for us to get music. And as shitty as it is that somebody didn't get paid, I have now rebought all those records. They've got my money twice, 3 times probably at this point, but which is fine, right? I have no problem with that, right? I don't mind supporting her. I buy my stuff generally anyway. But what do you think that impact was beyond, obviously it changed the record label, now we're 20, 25 years later. Like, what does that look like to you?
Well, it decimated it. Like, Napster decimated it. It was this really, you can almost, like, I was working in radio when Napster and LimeWire first started, and just as I was transitioning to MuchMusic, and the first 2 years at Much, the record companies were still, they were still, like, we were always on the road doing interviews and in the middle of my, almost like in one weekend, everything stopped. It completely decimated the industry. I know everybody loves to hate on Metallica and Lars, but they were right. They were right. And an enormous amount of people lost their money. And I remember talking to, and then it started to shift more digital. And I remember talking to Paul McGuinness, and Paul McGuinness was U2's manager. And I was doing a special with U2. And Paul and I were just talking one day, and he said, it's the thing that no one realizes about, this is early, right? Early in this game. He said, everybody is attacking the record labels, the fans, right? He says, what do you think it's going to be like when 1 or 2 tech companies control it all? He said, do you think it will be better for this is what he said to me. And this is 23 years ago.
That's crazy.
So it's an interesting, now, of course, streaming is figured it out. In a way that we all have access to music now. You don't own it anymore. The tactile thing. So there's a lot of pros and cons in each individual's mind. I know lots of people who love just streaming, and I know lots of people who would rather have a piece of music that they own. And early on, you could see, if you were paying attention, that we don't exactly know what's going to come out of this, but what we always know to be true is that artists and audience will get smothered. We always know that to be true because that's all of history.
Yeah.
And so now we have 4,000 subscriptions, which are more expensive than cable was.
Oh man.
Now it's they'll always find a way.
Oh, yeah.
They'll always find a way. And so it's been a renaissance for artists in some respects. SoundCloud was great for this, right? SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts are great for this. You can make a thing and put it up. That's great. But the industry now, look, the industry is making a ton of money now.
Right.
Because they always will.
Yeah.
It's just who's not getting the money now.
Right. Yeah. Where to get it from?
That's the big challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm a double-edged sword on it, right? Like from a younger point of view, it's like, I would never have known about 90% of the things I know about.
It was a renaissance.
That way, it was like crazy. Like, in terms of, you want to just look at it from an art point of view, type, or whatever, like that kind of thing. It's like, that was amazing. Now that I started in the music industry, I went to school in 2006, so I kind of started to get involved, and of course now I'm taking business courses and starting to really understand the nuts and bolts of it. And it's like, I was being a dick by supporting, Napster, in that way. And not to say I would take it back, because I definitely wouldn't, but it was like, holy shit. You know what I mean?
It's one of those moments where you have to sit back and just say, I'm glad I did it, but I can acknowledge it might have been wrong.
Definitely, yeah.
and that sucks for artists. I mean, that sucks for, it really did decimate it for artists. It really did.
Yeah.
Now where we live in a world is where artists can be independent and make more money than they did back then, but a whole confluence of events have to happen for that to be the case.
Yeah.
Artists have to be marketers. Artists have to be everything.
Yes.
They don't want to be. I totally understand that. It's the world we live in now, and a lot of artists who are able to do it they're buying, guys are buying $10 million houses just on SoundCloud money, right? Like, for being SoundCloud artists. And so the industry kids will always find a way to make the thing work. Then the industry will always find a way to snuff that out. And then the next group of kids will find a way to make it work. And then the industry will find a way to snuff it out and so they can keep the money. Because it really is just about them wanting to keep all the money and making sure you only get a little bit.
Yeah.
That's why in sports lockouts, I always side with the players. And I watch people all the time go, oh, the players are greedy. I was like, bro, the owners.
Yeah.
They hate communism. They hate communism, socialism, except when it comes to being bailed out to build their own arena.
Yeah.
Right. So, and sports, so they love a salary cap. They love a salary cap because it keeps it. So I will always side with the working person. I will never side with the other side.
I agree.
And
I agree.
And they've just convinced us to fight each other over this dumb shit.
Right.
So I'm always looking for the kid that figures it out.
And I think that's what propels it forward a lot. And like I say all the time, like the music, there comes a point, and as much as there is music out there for you, it becomes music for the kids eventually. Like, that's the point of it. That's my opinion, at least, is like eventually it becomes back for the kids. Like, it's not for me anymore. I'm 40 years old. Chapel Roan and whatever. It's good music. All that stuff. I like it. It's not that. It's just, it's not for me. It wasn't built for me. And the way it's marketed, it's not for me.
I follow this Instagram account called Showlist LA, and what it does every day it posts all the free concerts in LA that day. And most of them are metal or hardcore or punk or something like that. And it's all kids, right?
Yeah.
I go down to a lot of those shows. I go by myself because very few people I know want to go to these shows with me. And I watch this hardcore and punk and metal, and it still works, man. I'm still down because it's the energy that I love,
Yeah.
And there's shit that most people will never hear. It'll never break through, but like there's a band called Cancer Christ that are unbelievable. And Cancer Christ can never be a big band based on the imagery and the lyrics and all that. But whoa.
But in their world, they're sick.
It's the sickest. It's the sickest in their world, right? So fair warning, don't look up that band if you're easily triggered.
I will definitely be checking it out when we're done here.
Yeah.
Like, do you often go to those? Like, I mean, if you're in LA, you have to have been obviously Rainbow Room, or Rainbow,
Roxy.
And then Viper Room, Roxy. You know what I mean? Like those places. Have you seen any like bands who
I
took
saw
the next level?
I saw KRS-One on stage at the Whiskey, and growing up, I was a big Boogie Down Productions fan and KRS-One fan. And when he sang "Sound of the Police" in LA on stage at the Whiskey, it was pretty fucking rad. I definitely. But most of the shows that we see now are either in like some downtown bar or club. Not club, but bar, or it's like a warehouse, but then behind the warehouse, there's a 15-foot by 30-foot piece of dirt and grass, and you will show up for that concert, and you'll find out that it's actually somebody's birthday, and that you don't know it's somebody's mom's birthday, and then they put on this concert, and 40 of us or 20 of us will show up, just watch this wicked noise punk band. And then happy birthday, and there's a barbecue, and then you go. That's what's rad about a place that doesn't get snow, right?
Yeah,
you can do shit like that all the time, So I definitely still go and do that kind of stuff all the time. I've gone to the bigger places, but I realize that I almost never go to big concerts anymore, like almost never. And I went to see U2 at the Sphere, and I'll see big bands play big shows, but not nearly as much is I go and watch, I went to see a band, man. They were called Bitch Jagger. And the bass player had 2 strings on his bass because that's all he needed.
Oh,
and
wow.
I watched it and I went, yeah, this is because I love music.
Yeah,
I love music. So this is what I want to see. So I still will see a big band, but not nearly as much as I will just go to a random show last second. Also, it's partly because I don't want to make plans. So I want a last minute look on my Instagram and say, who's playing tonight? I'm going to go here. And that's it. I make the decision in 2 minutes. I'm in the car. I'm at the venue in 13 minutes and I'm inside. So 15 minutes from my couch to this random punk show downtown. That's the kind of life I want to lead.
Yeah,
I like that. I like it. So I guess talking about that, not wanting to leave your home, I'm assuming that's probably where House of Strombo must have came from. Like, where did that idea come from? Because I personally think, number one, shows are wicked. Bands are wicked. You know what I mean? Like, everything about it is wicked. But where did that come from? Where did that all start up from?
Before I worked at MuchMusic, I worked at a place called The Edge, which is a rock radio station in Toronto. And we broadcast from a storefront studio in the Eaton Center. So we were right on Yonge Street. Oh, yeah. So I was about 24 years old when I started to work there. And it was in that mid to late 90s era. So Chris Cornell would come in. Green Day would come in. These great artists would come in. Chuck D came in, and Ben Harper, and these bands I loved, right? They'd come in, and we would interview them at the storefront. Kid Rock came in before he was Kid Rock, and I remember Bush came in, and then from Detroit, all of a sudden a limousine pulled up, and Sergei Fedorov and Anna Kournikova showed up just to come watch them in Toronto. Like it was that kind of open air thing, and people in the audience could just walk in. There was no ticketing, there was nothing. You just hung around with us, right? And I think it was really important for the community because Noel Gallagher from Oasis would come in. We would do an interview. I'd play a song. He'd have 3 minutes. He'd go sign autographs, take pictures, talk to the kids. Same with Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails and Silverchair. These bands would come in, Chris Cornell, and then they would take pictures with the kids, and I would see the looks in the kids' eyes of just what this meant to them, right? All these women, when they were girls, right? They were young, but how empowered they were when they came in that day around Valentine's Day when I interviewed No Doubt and Gwen Stefani, and that connection was so beautiful, right? And the way, the kind of person I am, I walked in there was like these ropes around the studio. I took the ropes down, and people would just come and hang around the desk.
That's sick.
We were all young. We were just babies, all of us, myself included. So we would do the show, and there would be people all over. It was like a punk hardcore show, but on the radio, right? And so that's when I first played A Simple Plan on the radio, because a kid that I knew brought in a burnt CD of their first song, and they didn't have a label. They were nothing. They were just a kid, and they had I'm Just a Kid was the song I played. Wow. So crazy. Some 41 were 17 when they came in. Protest the Hero, Alexis on Fire. All these bands were coming in. So that's what was happening at The Edge. And then I left The Edge and I went to work at MuchMusic, a little bit more controlled, but still Queen and John, big windows. People would come knock on the window. I'd give them a tour. All the VJs would, Rick would, we would all do it, right? And so I grew up in this business understanding how important it was to let people be close to their artists. So one day I was walking down Yonge Street and I passed the old radio station, which is like some bullshit home sense. It wasn't home sense, but it was like something one like by a spatula. Yeah, it was like a temporary dollar store kind of vibe. and I made a right turn, and because the radio station moved to another location where they said they had that same vibe, but they didn't. And I made a right turn onto Queen Street off of Yonge, and I walked past, because I still live right by both those places. And I walked down Yonge, I passed the station, and I was like, oh, wow, here we go. And I made a right onto Queen Street, and I walked past MuchMusic, and they were no longer doing that. It was, I think, some daytime talk show or something. And I remember being angrier than I should have been. I remember feeling like, you guys, you don't know how hard people worked to make these two stations really important in their community, not because of us, but because of the audience. You don't understand. I got mad. So I got on my phone, and I called a buddy of mine. I said, hey, so I'm going to invite a band to play in my living room, and I'm going to let strangers in. And they're like, what? I said, yeah, fuck it, man, because I would just walk by The Edge, and I just walked by Much, and they blew it. And I was so mad at them. So I said, I'm gonna, and I said, who are you gonna ask? And I said, I'm gonna ask like Against Me and the Cult to come play. And that was it. And they said, well, you can't let people in. I said, of course I can. We're gonna do it. So I go to Coachella and I see the Cult. And I have one of these passes that lets me get backstage. So I go backstage and I see Ian Astbury from the Cult, and they say, dude, I'm going to start having concerts in my living room, and I really want you guys to play. And Ian Astbury said, yeah, fuck, we're in. No problem. Sick. Next time we're in Toronto, we'll do it. That was it. And so I went, okay, cool. So shit, now I got to do it. So I asked a couple bands to play, but one day I was in, I got a call and say, hey, Jimmy Eat World will play your living room with an audience. I said, cool. So I go, I'm in Montreal that morning. You love Jimmy Eat World, and you can be in Toronto this time. Meet me at this park. I'm going to let the first 30 people in. So I go on Instagram and I say, meet me at this park to the audience, right? Whoever. So I gave them an email address. I get a bunch of emails, and I had to kind of go through the emails to see who is somebody going to be crazy? Is somebody going to, and I looked at it and I wrote back a bunch of people, meet me at this park. So I show up at this park at noon, and there's a whole bunch of people there who just, and we haven't done this House of Strombo thing yet. So they didn't expect me to show up. And I show up and I was like, hi. They said, hi. I said, here, come with me. And we walked around the corner. I said, this is where I live. Come on in. We came in. I went, here comes Jimmy Eat World comes up from the basement and plays a concert in my living room.
Wow.
And so,
Sick.
And people's reactions were I'm dumb about a lot of things, but the one thing that I think I'm not particularly dumb about is the human experience. And I could see, I've interviewed a lot of people, right? So I've been lucky enough to see how human beings interact with each other. And I looked at how people were connected to this moment, and I thought, fuck it, let's just keep going. So then I started to ask other bands, and of course, a lot of bands said no. And I was down in LA, and I bumped into the guys from Behemoth, and I said, you need to do my show. And they're like, nah, cool, but whatever. And then they saw the Cult video. And we asked the Kills to do it, and their people said no. But then they saw the Cult. We invited one of them to the Cult concert. They saw that, and they went, we're totally in. And then I asked Steve Earle to play, because I knew Steve Earle. And Steve Earle said yes. And Gordon Lightfoot shows up at my house.
Wow.
Because he wants to see Steve Earle.
Oh my God.
And then one of my guys told Gord that it was happening, but hey, by the way, I know you knew Steve Earle. He's playing. So all of a sudden, and then I started putting on social media, and people were going, what's happening at your house? And it was strange. It was like, so people would walk in the house and they would be, where's the bathroom? And I was like, it's upstairs. So people would be they'd go, my bathroom. And then they would, and occasionally, I think a couple of times somebody would steal a thing, but it's just stuff. But honestly, in the 500 shows I did at my house, maybe only a couple times did something get a little bit strange. We had no security for most of them. One night, 4:00 in the morning, I got a crazy thing happening at the house, and the cops show up, and maybe it's 3 a.m, and the cops show up, and they're like, Strombo, what the fuck's going on in here? Everywhere. And I said, guys, I get it, but Jackson Browne is playing a concert right now in my living room. And the cops went, Jackson Browne, can we come in? Yeah. So they showed up and they started watching.
Oh man,
that's incredible.
And I think the fact that it was my house is that I put skin in the game. I remember one day at like 10 a.m, my doorbell rings, and I walk out, and it's Scott Weiland, and he's like, hey man, can I use your shower? And I was like, yeah. So Scott, it's just like, I think my passion for music is obviously what it is, but what's as important is sharing it and letting people. So that's really how it all started. And there was one video in my mind. I remember, I'm a big Against Me fan, and I'm an Against Me fan from the beginning, right? The very beginning. And I remember interviewing them on like their second record. I love Against Me. And I always had this video of seeing this weird concert where people had gathered all around Against Me on the floor. And on my brain, that's what I always wanted these to feel like. So one day we reach out and we tell Against Me's people, hey, they knew I was a big fan. George loves this band. Here's what we do. You're an inspiration. Can you do it? And Laura Jane said yes. And when Against Me played, like Pints of Guinness Make You Stronger in my home, it was this moment where I thought, this is a real thing now. Then John Prine said yes. Mixmaster Mike DJ'd a set on my Paul Oakenfold came in and DJ'd on my kitchen island. Like it was one day at 8 o'clock, the doorbell rings and fucking Grandmaster Flash shows up. One day James Hetfield comes in and you're like, this is fun. And I do it really for the fun. It pretty much bankrupted me because I got fired from Hockey Night in Canada and I took all that severance money and I put it towards this. all of the money that Hockey Night in Canada had to pay me, all of that money. So I would do a playoff. I would do the playoffs. And in my head, I'd be like, God damn, I hope this game doesn't go to overtime because I got 100 people at my house and I got a band ready to play. So, the game would be like, it's over. I'm like, okay, game's over. Thanks, guys. I loved Hockey Night in Canada, so I took it seriously. But in the back of my head, a double overtime, man, the show was going to start late. I would honestly finish an overtime playoff game. Peace, guys. Go in the dressing room, take off that suit, put on my jeans, get on my bicycle, ride home, start the gig. It was just like crazy madness all the time.
Like just that concept alone just seems unimaginable. Like, I'm going to have these people playing in my living room. Right. Yeah. And it's like I said, the experience alone for those people, those 30 people at the very start, like to probably every single person who's been in your home, they probably still talk about that to this day. That's a huge impact.
I went to see John Prine pre-COVID before he passed away, obviously, and I saw him at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. I'm a big Prine fan, right? And I'm a big that kind of country fan. And he said to me, he's like, that video. He goes, that video, man. He's like, that. He loved it so much. Steve Earle, the Melvins, so I'm a big punk guy, and Melvins played a concert in my living room, and I just bumped into Buzz from the Melvins on the street not that long ago, and he's like, that concert, like, because Power Trip too, right? I was going to get a veggie burger over here around the corner from my house at the best vegan burger place in the world, by the way, and Scott Ian from Anthrax is there with his kid, and his kid's like, I just watched your Power Trip concert, because Power Trip played in my, and so that kind of, also because I like the kind of music I like, we were giving a platform for a lot of the metal and punk stuff that wasn't getting that kind of treatment, and that's really important for me. And so Anthrax said they would play in my living room. I just need to find a sponsor now because I spent all that Hockey Night in Canada money.
There you go, yeah. That's the tough part.
Yeah. And then and I'm going to go back again. Like you gave a lot of people a chance. You mentioned before putting all these people on the edge radio. Do you feel like Canadian rock was unmatched in the 90s? So many great bands and artists came from Canada and were honestly everywhere. And sometimes we didn't even know they were Canadian until later.
We didn't, especially anyway.
We would just see them on MuchMusic and it's like, oh wow, have you heard this band? And almost all of them are Canadian.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that happened there. I think, in the late 80s, when a lot of people were listening to a certain kind of hair metal or, that kind of stuff in the rock, I'm talking about rock. When Canadian bands did that, it felt like maybe it didn't always feel totally authentic because that hair metal-y thing was very Sunset Boulevard, LA. Yeah. And people from, there's that famous Guns N' Roses video where he gets off the bus from Indiana, right? There was a vibe to that kind of thing. There were lots of great bands in Canada that were doing it, but it didn't really. So in the late 80s, when we were in that wave of post-punk, the Replacements, Pixies stuff, led the way to that explosion of alternative music. You could be Sloan in Halifax, and you could be the Gandharvas, and you could be, Limblifter, and you could be I Mother Earth. And now all of a sudden, what the audience was really responding to from around the world when we did it it felt authentic because it was authentic, because they weren't playing up. Basically, it's Value Village era, right? When we all started thrift shop, I remember we grew up wearing thrift clothes because that's all you could afford. So, and a lot of the bands that were wearing those thrift clothes because that's all they could afford. So when all that secondhand shit, like the bands were wearing stuff. Like if I walked to high school wearing spandex and teased hair, I'd have had my teeth knocked out of me, right? But if you go to high school wearing a fucking cigar or cigarette burned cardigan that your grandfather smoked in, which I did, he had cigarette holes because he fell asleep smoking a Benson Hedges, right? All of a sudden, Kurt Cobain was wearing the same shit you were wearing, so it kind of, it all kind of lined up. So I think that was there. Also, I think Canadian music, and this does not get talked about nearly enough, especially in Toronto radio, and a lot of the radio stations across the country, where, especially in rock, were taking their lead from this. The programmers in Toronto radio stations were heavily influenced by what was happening in the UK. And so there was this really cool kind of post-punk UK thing that was creating the space for what would be these really big Oasis was coming, right? And Blur were coming. So that stuff, and they were all directly influenced by the Beatles, which so were Sloan. So now all of a sudden, again, it's this alchemy of things that all seemed authentic. And then MuchMusic was there for it. And I was at Much at the time. We were so committed to the music that we were booking bands that MTV weren't booking because we were free to, and our bosses let us. There was a time at Much where, like I said, I hosted thousands of hours. I don't think they ever saw more than 3. They just let us do the thing. And so and now when you're watching at home in Newfoundland, all of a sudden you see, so Sloan from Halifax, of course, there was a band, Eric's Trip, that were really influential to us, an East Coast band, a maritime band, they're a maritime band, not an Atlantic Canada band, but they now you're connected to something because it felt true. So I think all these things kind of came together at the exact same time that let it really work. And then you had, Larissa Gulka and Rachel Perry and me, who liked music that wasn't mainstream. So we were always feeding stuff into our shows. And if Alexis on Fire didn't have a video, and they didn't have a video, I would wear an Alexis on Fire t-shirt on Much, knowing that some kid would try to figure out who Alexis on Fire was. And I know they didn't have a video because I was there the day they shot their first video. And I have somewhere in my house, I have old DV tapes of me, like one of those skater kids, of me filming the making of the first Alexis on Fire video. And so we just really cared about the bands, and we knew you were watching. Like I knew that there was a kid in Edmonton who didn't want to listen to this, but might feel connected to this Tool video. And then if I played Tool, I knew if I played a Canadian band right beside it, now that Canadian band and Tool are elevated at the same level. And I learned in radio, they would have a thing called the CanCon Graveyard, where I would host a morning show on the weekends. And the first 3 hours, we played 33 songs and 31 were Canadian because they were trying to bury as many Canadian songs as they could to meet their requirements. So I knew that was kind of against the spirit of supporting Canadian bands. So if I put a Canadian metal band on the same, Slaves on Dope from Montreal, after I played a Ministry video on Loud, now they're equals. And the hip hop shows were doing that at Much. That was really important to us, right? Really important to us. So that when you were watching across the country, and this what's fucking crazy to think about it, guys, is we're just in our 20s, man. I don't think we knew what we were doing, but we knew what we wanted to accomplish. Yeah. But we were just children. We were just kids making those shows at MuchMusic at the time.
Well, we're living proof of it, right? I distinctly remember when Alexis on Fire debuted that Pulmonary Artery video, and I was instantly online. Hey, you guys, you got to check this band out. Alexis on Fire, you got to check this band out. I'm writing on ICQ at the time or whatever it was that we were doing, but
It was freezing cold. It was ice cold in Toronto that day. There was the restaurant, the Keg Mansion, it was this old mansion in Toronto that had been turned into the Keg, and right beside it was this essentially abandoned home in Toronto on Jarvis Street, and that's where they shot it. So I was working at Much at the time. I remember a bunch of us just showed up at Much. Or not at Much, and there was like my buddy Donner from Vancouver who's doing radio there. We just kind of went to this house, and it was freezing cold, and they're like, they set up shop in this room, and I guess we're going to do a show now, and that's how it happened.
That's amazing.
Super cool.
And like you said, you guys had the freedom, and shout out to Denise Donlin who let you guys have free reign of the place, right?
Do your thing. Yeah. Super influential.
You got to. She never questioned anything. They trusted you, and you guys had the best interest for the people watching and listening at home, right? You were giving them an experience. You were introducing them to something new. So that's what we appreciate, right? Like I said, we're living proof of that. So
I'm grateful for that, man. I really am. And yeah, Much was, there was a guy called David Kynes and Denise Donlin who you mentioned. They let me do my thing. They hired me. I was a little bit more experienced. I had interviewed a lot of bands by this point. I have a work ethic that is to this day. Like I work 17 hours a day, easily 18 hours a day. And I still do. I've never lost that. Right. And at Much, I was there all the time doing stuff. And I think they trusted me. Also, the kinds of music we were playing, they didn't know anything about. And so they knew that if I said this metal band, if I'm playing this metal band, look, occasionally the producers would get in trouble for shit. I think the first time Tanya, who I work with today, a producer, brilliant, she put Guar on TV, and I think Moses Neimer lost his fucking mind.
What the fuck
lost his fucking mind. And she put Pavement on too, and he lost his mind. So there were times where you'd get in shit, but on my shows, I just did whatever I wanted. I just did whatever I wanted.
But yeah, even as crazy as Guar was, I had my buddy Jonathan Kennedy. Shout out to him. He was the guy writing me. You have to fucking see this band called Guar. You've never seen nothing like it in your life.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Like I said, that was the thing. Like, you'd see the thing, you'd catch the video, maybe you recorded it or whatever, who knows, or whatever, and then you'd just start passing it around, and you get to school the next morning. Hey man, like I was up at 1 and then I seen this video. Oh my god, it's so sick. Like I remember when the first time you played I Believe in a Thing Called Love by Darkness. I was like, hell yeah, like sold.
Do you want to hear a story? Do you want to hear a story about that? How that happened? This is what's funny about that one. I was going to London. I think I was about to interview Sporty Spice for MuchMusic, right? She was my favorite Spice girl, and my favorite Spice is for sure Pepper, but Sporty Spice was my favorite Spice girl. And a friend of ours in Toronto said, if you're going to London, there's a band I heard over there. They had no videos, they had no record, they had nothing. Called The Darkness. So you got to check them out. So I was like, all right. So I went to some bar, and a DJ who knew them had one of their songs and played a rough recording of "Get Your Hands Off My Woman."
Oh no way!
So I'm in England at the time, and I hear this. So we tracked down The Darkness, and they're at a local pub, and we said, "Can we come interview you?" And they said, "Okay." We show up, and Justin is like, "Why do you want to talk to us? Like we don't even have an album. Like we don't." And I said, and the producer said, because I heard that "Get Your Hands Off My Woman, motherfucker" line, and this is brilliant. And our friend Janny told us that so anyway, we think and I think they were going to shoot a video for that. So they said, okay. So we went out, they were like, their kids were there, and we just did this interview on a patch of grass outside of the pub. And we went back to Canada and we put that interview on TV. And The Darkness and I loved The Darkness and still do, right? Mm-hmm. And that's how that happened in Canada. I did the first Muse interview in Canada at a video store in Toronto, way before Muse were who they are now. Mm. And they would just show up and we would just book these bands. Sometimes you don't know if the audience is going to respond, but we knew right away that The Darkness was going to be.
They're so sick.
Was going to be something, man, because Justin could hit those notes.
Yeah, I think that video, like when I seen the video, like, because at first, I mean, pretty much everybody's reaction, I guess, is this a parody, or like what am I watching at first? But I'm like, man, the song is wicked. Like, regardless of what it looks like, it sounds good. So I mean, I'm going to listen or whatever. And I'm a big, like, classic 70s rock guy or whatever. And I was like, this is hitting all of the right boxes. And I really went out the next morning. Like, I remember because I worked at Dominion, well, Loblaws, whatever, at the mall. And I went and like, I wonder, would Walmart have that? Like, Permission to Land's Out. I wonder if it's there. And they did have it, which was kind of weird, but it was in the $10.99 rack, and that was the expensive ones because it was usually $9.99. I was like,
it was an import baby.
well, I gotta get it anyway. It doesn't matter, or whatever. And I put it, I put it in my CD player, my Walkman CD player that was plugged into my tape deck in my car. And I cranked it on, and like it's 10 songs, and I drove around until it was done after work, and I was like, this is friggin' wicked. Like, yeah, I very vividly remember that.
That's how I heard when I heard the first. I was in my teens and I went to a concert. I went to see Skid Row, and the opening band was Pantera, the Cowboys from Hell tour, and it was wow. And I had the Cowboys. I got the Cowboys tape and I loved it. But when Vulgar came out, Vulgar Display Power, that's what I was like. I put it in the tape deck of my car and I drove around and I listened to that tape like 20 times. I couldn't believe. Because that was right around the time Metallica were starting to get a little softer in their sound.
Yeah, that's true.
And so Pantera was right there to take the, that hammer of noise. So I know that feeling, that driving around the car, listening to a whole record. Oh, I loved it. Whole tape.
Oh yeah. I still do that. That's one thing I'm streaming it, but I still do it. Like I do have a shuffle, but I don't do that much. I will admit that I'm not a shuffler really. Like unless I'm doing nothing. Like if I'm just working and puttering around. But if I'm driving, I like to do albums.
Yeah. And for me, like I'm getting back into CDs now, so my truck still has a CD player. So I go to Goodwill, Valley Village, and just kind of scope out the CD sections. And I have compiled right now like over 100 CDs that I've gotten in the last year or so. So I like putting in the CD, and that's what I'm listening to for the next couple of days, or you know what I mean, from front to back, over and over and over again. And I appreciate that a little bit more, I think.
Yeah. For the longest time, I had down here, I had an old cop car with a Crown Vic, and it had a cassette deck in it. So, up until a few years ago, I just kept getting pulled over, so I finally got rid of it. But I would just go to every flea market around, and every time I drive by, there's a flea market, there's always some old dude selling tapes.
Sure, yeah.
And I'd think, I'm going to buy this Deep Purple tape. And I just drive around listening to fucking Deep Purple in my Crown Vic. And it was, honestly, I loved it. I have an 8-track player. I have like I said, my El Camino. So I have this old tape 8-track player, and I got a bunch of 8-tracks. And sometimes I'll get my Camino, and I'll plug in an 8-track. And it reminds me of being in a car with my mom and my dad when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
My dad used Pontiac Parisienne and with an 8-track player, so we would drive around listening to that.
Yeah, you just need somebody sitting there smoking in the front seat and a couple ashes blowing around to make the
perfect.
Yeah,
that was me.
Perfect.
But now I don't smoke anymore, so that's over.
Yeah, I gave it up a few years ago. I'm 3 or 4 years, whatever it is, into it now. Yeah, so enough of that.
Get the full effect.
I miss it, but I don't miss it. I like breathing, but I miss the functional of it.
Same.
Yeah, it's interesting. But so we're getting close to the end of our time, but I do want to get in. Like, so what are you up to now, man? Like, what are you up to these days? Like, when you're doing your Apple show, like, how's all that? Obviously, it's going well, but like, how's all that stuff going? What do you got on the future and that kind of stuff?
Apple's been great. In my career, this is the truth, before I took the Apple job, I was about to take a new interview show. I had a new interview show pitched to me, and I was going to do that audio, right, with a bit of a video component. And I got this offer to help them launch this new Apple station. And it was from a friend of mine from Toronto who's down here. And I thought in my mind, in my entire career, the only place I wish I could have stayed longer was the Edge. When I worked at the radio station, I was only there for 3 years. I was there for like 7 years, but 3 years before I went to Much. So I kept my other shows up when I went to Much. But I remembered when I was at the Edge is the last time I felt free. I was 26 and I was playing songs and seeing. It was like the last time that God, I loved that, playing those kind of bands. I missed that. So the Edge said to me, or the Apple said to me, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I want to do this." And they said, "Do that." And then in my brain, I thought, I know I'm an interviewer. I know I should probably do this interview show, but I kind of fucking want to do this. So I just did that. And we're in our 5th year now. We are in 165 countries. It's been a real pleasure to do it. We just switched from a daily to a weekly because I started doing interviews again. I launched the YouTube channel. I've been doing all that stuff. I wrote and directed a couple of short films. I produced a couple of indie features. So I'm at that stage of my life now where I want to do all the things I want to do. And so having this weekly show at Apple's lovely. I'm going to launch a new interview show soon. I'm in the works on that, but I just needed to do this Apple thing I just needed to do the show. And I love it. Apple Music, the producer and I, we went in to do the show the other, like, we never get notes. Just do your thing. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to play this. I'm play. All right, cool. So we just kind of play what we want.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
That's great. I know you guys stream and stuff too, like, and stream over TikTok as well. Like, now that there's going to be like a ban, how does that?
I would do that on TikTok. Yeah, I would do that on TikTok. I tried to stream on YouTube, but I just kept getting copyright strikes. So,
hard.
Yeah.
Instagram, when I streamed on Instagram, I would get copyright and kicked off too.
Mm-hmm.
TikTok was the only place I could live stream those shows. Yeah, but that's just me doing it because I just felt like I'm just a really big believer in whatever you can do to get people to see where great music is. Just do that,
And I mean, you're going to get people from all over the world, right? So like you're reintroducing these new bands to people that they haven't heard of before, right? That's all, like, that's the process, right?
A little bit of a history lesson too, which is nice. Like, I'm that guy. Like, I want to know who did it. I want to know all the things, like not just the stuff in the liner notes. I want to hear the dirt. I want to know what happened in the studio, all those things or whatever. So yeah, so I like that, right? Especially younger kids growing up. And I think we're coming back to, kids are starting to get back into older music, the kind of disposable thing. I mean, it's going to exist forever now at this point. It'll never go away, but it's not, I don't think it's as big as it was. Like, I'm finding kids are a little bit more getting honed in, kind of closer to what we used to do. I mean, it's in a different world, but similar to our type of stuff. So it's awesome to see, someone who influenced us, influenced the new generation of kids and showing them cool stuff. Also showing them something new. It's cool.
I think a couple things. One, if you listen to Nevermind now, it still sounds like the best record. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you listen to Kurt sing, it feels so real because it was so real. And I think there's a whole group of kids. Look, pop music will always be pop music, and hip hop is pop music, and dance music is pop music, and radio rock is pop music. So pop music will always be pop music, and that'll always be big, like you said. But there are a whole bunch of people out there who want to hear an actual human being tell the story that he or she wrote, thrash their way through a guitar. And, the mythology around Kurt and Lane Staley for sure contribute in the way that the mythology around Jim Morrison and Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin influenced people in my era. So the mythology definitely plays a role. But when you go back and listen to Hendrix, yeah, it's the fucking best. And so when you go back and listen to Nirvana or Alice in Chains, you're like, yeah, it's the fucking best. And so you definitely have a group of kids who have been fed so much synthetic, algorithm-y, pre-programmed beats, 900 producers, 650 songwriters on one track. You got a lot of that, and there are a group of people who think that's cool, but there's a whole bunch of kids who just who have that John Lennon thing in them, which is just give me some truth. I want a human being's thing. Yeah. And if you're connected to, if you want that, I mean, the 90s is a treasure trove of that stuff. It's yeah. I think, and I'll tell you about, I've been lucky enough to work with the World Food Program for a long time, so I would go to places around the world that are pretty compromised. And I remember coming back one day saying to somebody, there's three things that I see kids wearing a lot, not all, but enough that I noticed. Michael Jordan stuff, like T-shirts, Tupac T-shirts, and Nirvana.
Yeah.
You would see that smiley face or a Kurt Cobain T-shirt, and I was looking around. I think, God, the Kurt Cobain thing it's like Jordan, Pac, and a little bit of Biggie, but mostly Pac. They're dead, mythology, all that stuff. I get it, but you could see it. And I remember coming back thinking, and then when I was doing the early days of the House of Strombo, this is about, you go back like 10 years now, right? Where 8, 9, 10 years, and it takes years for it to hit the mainstream. But I noticed a bunch of the young bands that were coming in, especially when they were girls, were playing a more dissonant guitar. And you could see it and hear it. And then I always like to see what the young artists, regardless of gender, what pedals they're using. And I started to see the Rat pedal show up more and more. Kurt used to play through the Rat. And I'm looking at it and I'm just thinking, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm just noticing a lot of this stuff. Cut to 7 years later, everybody dresses like a 90s video. But what's funny is that when we were dressing like that in the 90s, we were just taking shit from the 70s that we found in thrift stores, right? So it's kind of that, right? It's kind of that.
It's the like 30-year cycle. Like that's what I always, my mom always says it, right? Like what when she was like my age, say 35 to 40, what she found cool when she was a kid is what we found cool when we were kids, but in our own twisted way, right? Like we would take it, put our own vibe on it or whatever, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I find it like grunge scene is very grunge. You know, I hate to even say it technically, but that scene in the fashion is very
alternative stuff. Yeah,
it's very much rooted in that. It's kind of hippie 70s culture, but you know, it's new Levi's jeans, not 70s Levi's jeans or whatever.
Yeah, you had the Pixies Replacements influence one group of them, and you had Sabbath and Zeppelin influence the next group. And then that late 90s, early 2000s wave of that punk stuff that was coming, the Sum 41, you took those two influences and then you put Iron Maiden's guitars in. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you could feel like, oh, wow, this is all coming together right now.
Yeah. I feel like, too, like, you know, where people are fed so much of this social media kind of algorithm bullshit, it almost feels like this stuff is a breath of fresh air to them. And so for the youth of today, and that this might make me sound old or whatever, but the youth of today, they're getting their hands on this Nirvana and, you know, the grunge scene and all this 90s stuff, and they want, people gravitate to what's real, right? Like you said, it's real stuff, and it's not the Taylor Swift and the Drake, and that's fine, and that's got its place and all that. But a lot of youth, I find, are, you know, you see them with the Nirvana shirts, like you said, and it's almost like, you know, it's real to them, and it's a breath of fresh air, and it's something new that they can just take, and it's that mythical stuff that's going to keep living on forever. And I don't know anyone of today who's going to be able to be put up into that same category. Do you think anyone today is going to be, you know, held to that same regard as the Hendrix, Jim Morrison, you know, Pac?
Well, I don't know about Hendrix, but I think in a way, so I remember being young and somebody had a VHS tape of Bad Brains performance. And the first time I saw HR as a young man on stage was on that tape. I had never seen anything like that, right? And the energy is what got me. So I feel like today, that kind of energy, you know, it's interesting. There's an artist called Youngblood, and there's something happening there. I don't know what it is yet, but I can see something happening in that with him. It's still very emo, so it's very polished and all that. It isn't raw, but I don't know how raw this era will be. Maybe the era after this will be raw, into more raw stuff. But Youngblood I find interesting as a persona. It'll never be the same because this era grew up with front-facing cameras, so they're used to seeing themselves all the time. And the Hendrix era, they were separate from the media. Now it's all the same. Now it's about sponsorship and opting in, whereas our group opted out. And so once this group opts out, then it'll be I think you'll see something like that happen in the weirdest way, even though she can't opt out because she is the in. Taylor Swift's the boss, right? And so I look at a lot of what Taylor Swift is doing and think, God, that's really interesting. And now if you watch those Taylor Swift videos on social media, a lot of them is the audience showing them singing and crying less than seeing Taylor. So it's more about their experience, which is very valid, but that's interesting. And I find what's happening in the Taylor world very interesting. I don't know what Taylor does. The Eras tour was one of the craziest things I've ever seen in my life, right? And so I'm interested to see what she does with it. So I feel like there's an element of, as big as she is, there's a tiny element of outsiderness to Taylor Swift, which I don't think she gets enough credit for. And I know it sounds crazy to say because she's the biggest, but she feels outsider to me. And she made the industry follow her terms as opposed to the other way around. That's pretty dope. That's pretty dope. What does Taylor Swift do in 5 or 6 years? I don't know what anybody does in 5 or 6 years because we don't know what 5 or 6 years will do. But here's what I can tell you from my perspective. Don't know if I'm right. But this next wave of kids are really into, especially the ones that are into anime kind of stuff and computer generated stuff. And you see it with K-pop where there's like, it's an industry behind one band where it's a company. AI is going to be their primary, AI generated music will be their primary stuff. AI will never replace Eddie Vedder or Stone Gossard. Never. What you want from a Metallica show and a Pearl Jam show, even the young kids at that Pearl Jam show, they will never get that from a generated album because a generated album doesn't have an experience. And what is human is to have I believe humanity is an experience. So there will be a whole group of people who, and I think a lot of the pop and the dance and the hip hop, a lot of it, not all of it, the stuff that is very industry will be very generated. Then there will be a whole other group of people who don't want that. So I think that's what's coming. And then that's where you're going to find a space for somebody to really, to really do it. The next Kurt, I mean, they said there would never be another John Lennon, right? They said there would never be another Jim Morrison. So there's always a thing. For the longest time, Manson, I think, was the most interesting guy in that space, but obviously he's not that guy for lots of reasons. And I don't know who will do that next thing, but I know that the environment is primed for somebody who's real. Primed for somebody who's real. And metal, by the way, and punk, always the same. Like we always have there's always metal and punk is still fucking the dopest because that ain't our shit. When I heard some AI generated metal tunes, I was like, yeah, it totally sounds good. But it ain't Hell Ripper where he plays every instrument by himself, And so, and Hell Ripper's new, and there's a band out of, I think they're from Wales, called Venom Prison, this gnarly death metal band. This woman called Larissa is the singer, and I'm not going to go see an AI version of that. What she's doing is fucking heavy. That's metal. Yeah, maybe there's going to be some AI metal, but it'll never replicate the feeling of seeing Behemoth yell "Hail Satan" live. Never, man. And so I think the genres I like are going to be completely fine. Honestly,
good. That's awesome. I'm always intrigued about to hear what people think is coming, especially with AI on the horizon. It's not even on. It's here. It's already here. It's too late, kind of thing, stuff like that. So yeah. I find that stuff interesting.
Yeah, you'll have generated backing tracks and stuff for sure in metal, and you'll hear that stuff. But you'll never replace the story. You'll never replace the human experience.
No, I agree with that. My friend.
You know that Rancid song where he says, where Tim yells, "Hanging on the corner of 52nd and Broadway, the cars pass by, but none of them seem to go my way. New York City, I wish I was on the highway back to Olympia." Like that that feeling, I'm having a hard time understanding that feeling that he sings. If you've ever been broke and you've ever felt misunderstood and you've ever felt that, and you hear Tim's warbly voice do that, and then you hear Lars and Matt on the chorus, no computer will ever know what it was like to be broke and be in a city you shouldn't be in.
This is true.
It'll never, because it'll only be reflecting back what somebody else had.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not against generative AI. I'm not against any of that. It's just, that's like being against the sun rising. Here we are. I'm against the C-suite and the shareholders who are shoving this shit down our throat so they can fire people, so they can make more profit and convince a whole group of working class people that they're on their side. I'm against that shit. But how I feel when I hear Rancid, there's no fucking way. There's no way AI is going to ever make me feel the way I feel when I go see Napalm Death live. There's just no way.
Yeah. And you can't replicate the fact that some of these bands grew up single parent homes and had to fight their way to get what they had and to save up all their dollars to get their first guitar and be on the road in a piece of shit Ford van with they're on the borderline carbon monoxide poisoning every night and stuff like that. You don't get that kind of thing from AI, and that's I think what makes it some of these bands so special and some of the songs so special, right?
Totally. And there's a whole bunch of people who like music but don't think about it the way we do. And so for them, that's going to be great. They're going to be able to listen to an AI generated song and they'll never have to worry about that musician that they love suddenly saying something they disagree with politically, right? So it's easy. It's easy. And it will be for the people who like that kind of stuff. And so I'm not knocking it. But it will never, because the kind of music that I like, for the most part, they're not doing Taylor Swift era shows, with the exception of U2 and Metallica.
Yeah.
And Pearl Jam and Springsteen. But that's like very few of them play for, very few of my favorite bands have ever played for bigger than 80 people. They play in a fucking basement in a church in my old neighborhood, and they're still my favorite bands,
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So we'll bring it back to you because I wanted to talk to you a bit before we get going about Gord Downie, of course. You had the privilege, the honor of doing one of their final interviews, and of course, like the doc and a couple other things that you were involved with there. What was that experience like, especially during that time, like for you being a friend, you know what I mean, the whole thing kind of thing?
Hard, man. It was hard. Losing Gord is hard. And because he was a North Star, right? And when you lose a North Star, when that star burns out, you get the afterglow for a long time, and those are Gord's lyrics and his messages. And so we still have that. When I read the audio book for the Tragically Hip story, the Barclay book, there were a lot of times that I was in the studio narrating that where I would just have to stop in the middle of the sentence and go walk and stand behind the door so that the producer and engineer wouldn't see me, because I would get really emotional, and I'd have to stop so I wouldn't break down, because it's your friend, but not just your friend. He's just really one of a kind, right? Really special. And so it was hard, but goddamn those songs, man, those lyrics. What I like now, because the hip were so ubiquitous in Canadian radio, they were everywhere. It was easy for a lot of the cool kids to take it for granted or just not give it the kind of credit it deserved. And now, when you go back and listen to some of those songs, I see a lot of people who maybe didn't quite connect to the hip really feel it. I got to host a Canada Day show in London at Trafalgar Square, and the hip played it. And there were thousands and thousands of Canadians in Trafalgar Square. This is 2013, packed. And I remember going on stage, and I paused for a second, because very few people they told me this too, that almost nobody gets to introduce the hip on stage. that I was allowed to. I know that Don Cherry has, Dan Aykroyd has. It wasn't a thing where the hip had a lot of that, right? And I got to go on stage and introduce the hip. And Gord was standing side stage in a seersucker suit and just looking dope. And he puts his hands on my shoulders and he says, "George, I really get the feeling that tonight's going to be the night." And he walks out and they just murdered the crowd. And, because Canadians living in England, you miss home, and the people crying and then there were usually, my favorite part was like that one dude who brought his English wife or girlfriend to the gig, and or sometimes it was a Canadian girl who brought her British boyfriend to the gig, or girlfriend to the gig, or boyfriend, whatever, and you could tell that, and they didn't grow up around the hip, that they were not prepared for the energy of seeing the hip outside of Canada when you haven't been home for a long time. I've seen a lot of bands in my life all around the world. I've seen wild shows in small clubs in Haiti. I'm sweating. Like, I've been all over the place seeing crazy shows, right? Great shows. Solo drum sets in Syria, like wild stuff.
Wow.
Cool stuff. Seeing the hip play in another country where one person in that relationship is not from Canada, and them looking at their partner. Like, I almost get emotional talking about it now, because there'd be a guy screaming out, or a woman screaming out, and get Ry Cooder to sing my eulogy at this huge, huge volume. And then there's people looking at it like, what am I? This is like part revival, part cult, part fucking insanity, part bar band show, am I watching a spoken word experience? And like, there's just nothing like that. There's just nothing like that. So yeah, losing Gord was just like, oh my God, there are a lot of great bands in the world, but there's nothing like this. Even the hip haters can't tell me of another thing like that, where and then all of a sudden Gord Sinclair and Paul Langlois and Robbie with these, like, with Paul's background, his harmonizing, there's nobody. This fucking everything was happening at a hip show, and then to have that experience about being so far away, like there's just nothing like that, Yeah, so I mean, you miss the personal stuff, but then you realize that the culture will never have this. And I hear hip haters all the time, and it's because, if fucking all the media and the coverage, like, shut the fuck up. You do not know what you're talking about. This is different. I have no problem. I know taste is objective and all that, but when people try to tell me that it ain't that, it's like, yeah, man, take a seat. This is you do not have the facilities for this conversation, because the hip thing is special, because it's pre that thing we talked about earlier, where Canadian bands were, because people forget, with the exception of like Rush and Joni Mitchell, and really only like a couple of their songs, and Neil Young, and maybe Guess Who, there were not a lot of Canadian bands that were what was happening in your era, right? The hip were the band that predated it and helped usher it in. So they were from multiple generations. And if you like blue collar working class rock and roll, you like the hip. If you like great poetic lyrics, and you like mystery and bad attitude shit, listen to Locked in the Trunk of a Car. Mm-hmm. If you want snarkiness, listen to, if you're into irony and being too cool for school, listen to Poets. If you want a banger, listen to Music at Work. If you want art, listen to For a Good Life, You Just Might Have to Weaken. Like, they had kind of all that stuff. And in the middle of 100th Meridian, that breakdown, if I die of vanity, promise me you'll bury me someplace. Yeah. That thing, you fucking have all this stuff.
Yeah.
And that really, the hip they're more special. And when I went to watch that, I didn't go back to Canada for the last concert. I didn't want to do it. A buddy of mine screened it in a theater in LA, Canadian. And I went I stood in the back of the theater by myself, standing up, leaning against the wall, loving it but not enjoying it, knowing what was coming, and crying through the whole show, and just thinking, God, we're never gonna have, this must be what it would have been like when people lost John Lennon. You know, like it's we're just not gonna have this again. Just never gonna have this. You might have cool shit, but you're never gonna have this, because Canada's not the same. It's from a changing era of Canada, and the country's not the same. So we're just never gonna have that.
Yeah. I would agree, 100%.
Incredible.
Yeah, and I would encourage all the haters to take a few hours and go watch the new documentary, and don't cry.
Yeah. I still haven't watched it.
Oh man. Oh,
I know,
like to be that close to it, I don't know if I would be able to be fair. Like the final episode was nuts. Like too much.
When Mike, his brother was doing the interview with me in my house for that doc series, and there were some moments where we would just stop. I would just stop talking, and I would look at him, and he would stop, and our eyes were just getting red and glassy, and we would stop, and I just thought, yeah, I don't think I want to. Do you want to hear a cute story about Gord that people don't know about, the kind of guy he was? I would take these long ass motorcycle trips, right? And on my leather jacket, I had a couple patches sewed on. One of them said, R.I.P. MCA. One of them had Strummer's Law, that no input, no output thing from Joe Strummer. But really what I had, the secret one, was it said Grace too. And it was always a reminder when I put on my jacket to go out, because I would be by myself camping across the country in the States. And Gord would text me, and he would just say, I'll be worried until you get back to Toronto safely. He said, so like he was that guy. He was that guy that would worry about you. And I didn't know him we weren't like best friends. It wasn't like that. We were close. We were pals, but we weren't, he didn't call me to talk about his problem. Like, it wasn't that. But he's the kind of guy that would worry about you and just shoot you a little message to make sure that, hey, keep safe tonight on a road trip. That's the little things those are the messages you miss, that little thing where you're like, oh yeah, that guy was just a dude. He was just a cool dude, man.
Yeah, that's the person there. Like, that's the actual person, right? That's
Yeah.
different. Yeah, that's beautiful, really. Like, that's a real friend, really, right? Like,
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
As much as you say you might not be close, that's a real friend, though.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, we'll end it on that.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful sentiment to end on. But we really
Appreciate
appreciate it, dude, for coming today.
Yeah.
Sitting and talking with us, and doing it on short notice too. Love that. Awesome. So
thank you. I appreciate you guys. I really do appreciate you having me on. Thank you. Hope that was okay. Hope that was what you guys were going for.
Absolutely.
yeah, dude. Yeah, we just
Love
like to sit and shoot shit kind of thing. Just get.
I tend to ramble and tell stories, and sometimes I don't want to bore you with the details, but sometimes I want to weave you into what this is, what actually happened.
No, man.
That's perfect for me,
perfect.
and that's exactly what I'm looking for. I love hearing the
it's about
stories.
you, not about me.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I want to live vicariously through you for a little bit, so I love it.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, man. When are you guys going to post it? What's the plan?
So this will be next week's episode now. Yeah, we had a follow through yesterday. We kind of just taped some random nonsense or whatever, but we'll put it up, so it'll be Thursday next week. So what is that, the 20...
Or Wednesday next week.
Or Wednesday next week, I should say, yeah. 28th or whatever it is.
Yeah, so next Wednesday it'll be out.
Or 22nd, I should say.
And we'll post it. We'll make some clips eventually and stuff, and tag you in it if you don't mind. And stuff.
Shoot me links or clips or whatever you want, and then I'll try to we'll try to coordinate where I can make sure I can drive some attention to it as well. Not that I'm gonna, you don't need me to do that, but I'm happy to be a part of it.
We appreciate it.
Appreciate it, dude. Like so much, and thank you for everything, especially. Especially back in the day for MuchMusic and stuff like that. I mean, that was a huge influence on a lot of stuff that now that we're 40, if you kind of had the look in this room, you'd probably laugh because it's probably very similar to what you have in your house right there.
Oh yeah. No, that's great, man. That's great. Yeah. Most of the art in my house is like old satanic shit or biker shit. That's what I have now. It's got a lot of like crazy. I looked around the other day and I went, God, I got a lot of satanic shit in this. Those are like occult because of metal.
Yeah.
Like I got a lot of horror stuff. God, I gotta get rid of this shit. I get so much of that.
Get some fancy decor in here. Awesome.
Thanks,
man.
guys. I appreciate it, man.
Really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll reach out again, and we'll get you back on again sometime.
If you ever want to have me back for part 2, just let me know.
Yeah, dude.
Oh yeah.
Always.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so
Cheers.
much.
Peace.